Hey guys, and welcome to the first video on Generic PowerPoint Animated History YouTube channel. I'm your host, Quispy, and joined with me is my co-host. Yes, we are another minimalist random history event teaching YouTube channel, and we don't care. Here, we are dedicated to educating you on the most obscure conflicts and events in history. Today, we will be covering the Swiss Civil War. Hard air quotes on the war part, by the way. It was more of just a cat fight. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Before we get into the actual war, we need to give a bit of background. For that, I'll now let my co-host take it away.
Hey, you'll be seeing a lot of me in these videos. So, this whole story starts how everything starts in the 1800s. The man who conquered everything, but is still 4 inches shorter than me, Napoleon. So, Switzerland was always a confederation where all the little regions, or cantons, had their de facto independence. The Swiss Confederation was always more of a glorified defense pact and trade agreement.
Yes, we are aware that the politics were a lot more complicated at this time, but keeping it simple, so take our word for it.
He decided to Napoleon everything up by forcing them together, taking a chunk of their land, and then leaving them to fall into anarchy. However, in 1803, his little problem got out of hand, so he united them all in the Mediation Act. This act actually helped a good bit because it established individual rights and stabilized the country. This spread early ideas of liberalism and nationalism. After this whole Napoleon thing, however, everything was returned to normal in the Swiss Constitution of 1815. The cantons got their peace and quiet and society and chunk of land back. All was good in the world. But there's just one thing. Napoleon's ideas are like AIDS. You can never truly remove it, and it just keeps spreading. As in all of Europe, liberal ideas were mostly suppressed for now, and the country did have a lot of economic growth as it experienced early industrialization. It seemed almost as if nothing even happened. However, under the surface, things were starting to heat up. Let's talk about Catholics and Protestants. In Europe, they never really had the best history with each other, what with all the bloody religious wars over the centuries. However, things mostly died down in Europe by this point. The majority of Switzerland's cantons were Protestant. However, Catholic cantons were able to maintain control within their borders, and many Catholic cantons liked this. So when Protestant liberal cantons wanted a more unified state, naturally some conservative Catholic cantons were not exactly thrilled with this idea. In the 1830s, this conflict became more apparent. Reformers were actively trying to centralize the country, threatening Catholics. Along with this, a few other Protestant cantons became uncomfortable with the reforms. The 1840s only accelerated this division. With a unique economic depression hitting the country, people began to turn to more radical factions. With that, tensions started to build, and then the dominoes started to fall. In 1841, Aargau, a liberal Protestant canton of Switzerland, dissolved Catholic monasteries within its borders, going against the Constitution. This pisses off the Catholic cantons who, in 1844, decided to invite Jesuits to take charge of education in Lucerne. The liberal Protestants hate Jesuits, and they get very pissed off. They got so pissed off that, in 1845, a staff officer even led a volunteer expedition into Lucerne itself, which fails and only manages to piss off the Catholic cantons even more. So, said Catholic cantons decided to create a defense pact, which the war will be known for, called Sonderbund. This pisses off the Protestants because, of course it does, who all vote to dissolve Sonderbund, make a new constitution, and kick out the Jesuits. The Catholic cantons, of course, say no, and instead choose to arm themselves because they're pissed off. And now, we have a war. A very civil war.
Thank you for the pre-war analysis, co-host. Now let's get into the interesting part. On the side of the mostly Protestant federal troops, we have one Guglielmo Henry Dufour with about 100,000 well-trained troops at his side. A veteran general from the Napoleonic Wars, Dufour has some serious experience under his belt. It also appears that he is working with a superior army and a numerical advantage. The commander of Sonderbund is Johann Ulrich von Sadi-Soglio. While an experienced general in his own right, he is leading a smaller force of 79,000 inferior militiamen. On the sidelines today, we have the cantons of Neuchâtel and Appenzell, who decide to remain neutral in the conflict. Opening shots are fired, and the war has begun. Sonderbund will actually take the first offensive actions, given the divided nature of the Sonderbund territories. Soglio first takes the St. Gothard mountain pass in an attempt to separate troops from Lavini and Ticino. This will only be a shallow victory, as the San Bernardino pass still remains in federal hands. Soglio will then make a push to relieve the besieged army in Fribourg. However, this will not go down well for Sonderbund as Soglio was forced back. Seeing this failed attempt, Dufour decided now is the best time to seize the city. Friedbro had major strategic significance to both sides. Its proximity to Bern made it a high priority target for the central government, and since should it fall to Sonderbund, it would be the launching point to take the capital. Not only that, but it was also isolated from the rest of Sonderbund, making it a good target for Sonderbund in order to connect it with the rest of the breakaway state. On November 9th, Dufour launched his campaign. Dufour pulled the tried and true, make them think we are doing one thing and do another maneuver. In this case, honestly probably from no action on his part, the garrison thought the attack would be an assault from the direction of Bern. Instead, Friedbro would find itself surrounded by 60 cannons pointed towards the city. On November 13th, Dufour called for the city's surrender, and a truce was called for the day. It is worth knowing that due to a communication mess-up, a brief firefight broke out that would leave 8 people dead. The next day, though, the city government would surrender and even rejoin the central government. The loss of Friedbro was kinda nail in the coffin, because not only did they lose a strategically placed city, they also lost any chance of taking it back since technically it wasn't even in Sonderbund anymore. Soglio simply had no choice but to retreat to central Switzerland, where he would remain on the defensive for the rest of the war. Dufour would move to take the city of Zug, which would surrender without a fight on November 20th. Remaining on the offensive, Dufour would then push to the river Zur, near the town of Giskion, where the longest, 2 hours, and bloodiest, 37 dead, battle of the war took place. Of course, it would end in a federal victory after Soglio was wounded by a mortar shell. Fun fact, at least at the time of writing, this would be the last major battle of the Swiss army. It is worth noting, however, that there was a small military skirmish near Meerskapel, but this only had like 20 dudes, so there wasn't a real battle. Realizing that there was no way to take Bern and understand that the federal troops were just better, the cantons of Sonderbund began to surrender. Pardon me for botching any of these pronunciations, but Jesus Christ, Swiss names are hard to pronounce. On November 25th, Nidwalden and Schweiss surrendered. The next day saw the Council of Sonderbund dissolved unofficially, but everyone just left. On the 27th, Uri would raise the white flag, and the final canton to surrender would be Valais on November 29th, bringing the war to an end with a federal victory. The final casualty count ended up being 60 killed and 386 wounded on the federal side, and 33 killed and 124 on Sonderbund. This war really put civil in civil war, as less than 100 people died. In fact, it was so polite that when Friedbro was sieged, the cannons we mentioned earlier didn't actually fire for fear of killing civilians. What emerged from the war was a much more centralized Switzerland, focused more on national reconciliation than punishing the rebels. Obviously, the governments of the rebellious cantons had to resign, with the liberals put in power, but there wasn't any public execution. Those neutral cantons of Nachenthal and Appenzell had to pay reparations for being neutral pussies even by Swiss standards, paying 300,000 and 15,000 francs to wartime widows respectively. The time was now to build a more centralized Switzerland. The first thing needed to do this was a constitution. Modeled after that of the United States, the Constitution would destroy the Landsgemeinde, the former Swiss ruling party. There would be proportional representation, meaning say your party is 33% of the population, your party gets 33% of the seats. This would be a sustainable peace and balance between the various linguistic groups that we find in Switzerland today. It is worth noting that the Jesuits were expelled from Switzerland, and fun fact, this ban would only be lifted on May 20th, 1973. Switzerland emerged from the war a more centralized state and, with its tradition of neutrality, was on the path of modernization and becoming the chocolate-loving bankers that we know today. Of course, this was done with the help of gold from, well, certain benefactors, but that's a different story. The Sonderbund War, while small in scale and extremely low in bloodshed, did shape the fate of a nation. I hope you enjoyed our first video. Expect more to come. I am Quispy. This is my co-host. Subscribe if you enjoyed, and we'll see you soon.